We're going to shift to our final segment of the night, which is this one is going to be very interesting. Our teams of the year. Now, Garth, this was very difficult. As always, we're going to do a normal team of the week format, but then after we'll show our cumulative teams based on who appeared on the list the most times. As always, we'll start with your list first. So your team of the year for the regular season, you got Connor McJesus, Nathan McKinnon, David Pastrnak as your fours. Defensively, Erik Karlsson and Quinn Hughes. Goalie, Linus Ullmark. We've also done more honorable mentions for this one because there's too many great players that we want to give a shout out to. And even then, there's so many guys that we had to leave out for this. But your honorable mentions, Leon Draisaitl, Cooch, who just scored the goal for you guys, Josh Morrissey, Rasmus Dahlin, Connor Hellebuyck, and, of course, Ilya Sorokin. So, Garth, very tough choices in this one, but go ahead, kick it off. Explain to us your teams of the year.
Yeah, so I think the guy that I have to spend the least amount of time on, because literally before I even sat down to look at numbers, create my list, it was like obviously Connor McDavid
Yeah.
is going to be on there. I mean, the guy had 153 points, by far most in the salary cap era. The previous record was actually my guy, Nikita Kucherov, with I believe 136. So he beat it by almost 20. Also a 60-goal year for him. Led the league in assists as well. Managed to be a plus 22, which is really impressive with how bad that Oilers defense and goaltending situation is. So that also, scoring aside, that right there stood out to me as well. But I won't spend too much time on him because, like I said, that was the one that was like, yep, he's obviously on it. Don't even need to question it type of guy. Second pick there in the top center, Nathan MacDog McKinnon. This might be a little bit of a surprise to some people, so I'll kind of explain why I went with this one. 42 goal year, 69 assists for 111 points total, which was good for fifth most. But keep in mind, the four guys ahead of him all played 10 to 12 more games than him, as he only played 70. Also a plus minus of 29, which for a team that had a lot of their defensive core banged up, struggling with injury for pretty much the entire season, that also really stood out to me. He was kind of one of the staple pieces that helped hold this team together in their highs and lows this year. So, really, really good season following up that massive deal that he just got in the offseason. And also, he contributes on both sides of the ice. He got it done hitting as well, 53 total hits, so that's not too shabby. 44% from the faceoff dot as well, so that wasn't exactly like elite, but not bad by any means either. And like I said, he played fewer games than all these other guys, so that really, really stood out to me. And then third and finally for the forward core up there in the top right, David Pastrnak, who already was a huge postseason presence last night for the Boston Bruins. Another 60-goal scorer like Connor McDavid with 61. 52 assists, 113 total points, which was good for third in the league. Also, he played considerably less time on ice than a lot of these other guys with 19 and a half minutes. A lot of these guys were in the 20 to 23 range. So very, very effective with less time on ice. Plus minus of 34, which other than Jason Robertson, a few spots below him in terms of scoring, was by far the best out of all of these guys. That really stood out to me. Also, too, and I don't think a lot of people would think about this, but out of kind of the guys who are in the top 10 territory, by far the most hits, 91. That's really, really impressive to me, honestly. 42% from the faceoff dot, so it was, right around the same spot as McKinnon there. Just overall, both sides of the ice now, a really, really good season for Pasta there, a player who I personally really enjoy watching despite not liking the Bruins at all, quite frankly. But nonetheless, hats off to him. Fantastic season. Moving on to defensemen, I think, much like Connor McDavid, this was the guy that was going to for sure be on my list because of just how insane he played on a absolutely terrible team this year. 101 points. We talked a lot about him on the show throughout the course of the season. First time scoring 100 points by a defenseman since, I believe, the 80s or maybe 90s. I don't know. It's been a long time. We talked about it on one of the shows. 25 goals, 76 assists, 101 points. Unfortunately, minus 26 now in the plus minus category, but that team is so bad that I can't exactly hold it against him. and we never said he was making the list because of how good he was at the blue line. Still, though, managed to block 90 shots, which was one of the higher numbers in the league. I mean, there's guys above him, but by no means is that bottom of the barrel. So, he did contribute a little bit on that end of the ice, but he's mainly on here because of how good he was offensively and the fact that he played on an absolutely abysmal roster. Much like the other guy I elected to go with in Quinn Hughes here. Only 7 goals on the season, but a whopping 69 assists for 76 total points. That was tied for second most points on the season by defensemen, plus minus of 15, which really stood out to me because much like the Sharks, the Canucks are not a good team. They did not have good defensive play pretty much all year. But another thing that really stood out to me, 71 block shots, again, not the most or anything, but, he contributed on that side of the ice. He also dealt with some injuries this year too. He wasn't always 100%. He was actually battling through injury most of the year. So getting it done despite not being 100%. And then last but not least, in goal, Linus Ullmark. Honestly, goaltender was very hard for me to narrow down because there's a lot of guys with very similar save percentages, goal allowed average, win-loss, or sorry, not win-loss, but like total shots faced, total shot, or save attempts rather. But really the one thing that really stood out to me, obviously, was the wins, 40-6 on the year. Absolutely insane. 1.89 goals against, 938 save percentage. Just absolutely crazy year by a guy who I don't think anybody saw this coming and was going to have the type of year he had. I actually thought Jeremy Swayman would kind of be the guy there in Boston because he looked very promising last season, but Linus Ullmark came in, stole the show, and is a very, very large reason why the Boston Bruins were so good this season. In my personal opinion, the guy who I think is going to win the Vezina Trophy when the awards do get given out. But yeah, goalie was probably the hardest one for me to narrow it down to just one guy, Noah. But I had to rock with Linus Ullmark there. And then, as you mentioned, Draisaitl, Kucherov, Morrissey, Dahlin, Hellebuck, and Sorokin, as my honorable mentions, all guys who very well could have made this list.
Oh, God, Garth, this was so tough. You got all these great choices, which, I completely agree and understand with all your choices, but the honorable mentions as well. And even then, you have to leave out some good guys. There's no Kachuk in your honorable mentions, or Adam Fox isn't on there. There's some really good players. Cale Makar, just to name a few. Jason Robertson isn't on there. I mean, there's just so many unbelievable players this year to choose from. So I'm going to go ahead and put mine up. I'm going to put it out there right now. I believe mine will be more controversial than yours because I have one choice that you might not expect, but the others I think make a lot of sense. So let me go ahead and put mine up. Now I will explain everything. Okay, I think you already know which choice I'm talking about here, but we'll start with the obvious one. Connor McDavid. I mean, get in line. He led the league in goals, assists, points. He was a plus 22. He had 21, or he had 39 even strength goals, 21 power play goals, doing a bit of everything. 11 game-winning goals. He also had 26 game-winning points, which was second in the NHL, behind only his teammate Leon Draisaitl with 28. I mean, this guy is just, and what I like the most, he improved on faceoffs this year as well, 51.93%. 89 hits, 40 block shots, 18.2%. I mean, shooting percentage, just get in line. Best player in the NHL, obvious choice. Record-breaking season, like you said. Connor McDavid, obvious. Next is Leon Draisaitl. I went with him. Now, I know he's only a +7, but 52 goals and 128 points. He was comfortably second most points in the entire league behind only his teammate. Like I said, he had the most game-winning points in the league with 28, 54.9% face-off percent, 66 hits, 40 block shots. He also had 21.1% shooting percentage, so very efficient shooting the puck as well for Mr. Draisaitl. And he also missed 2 games, so, I mean, give him a couple more games, he might have gotten 130-plus points and broken Kucherov's record as well, because I believe it was 128 or something like that. Definitely high 120s, low 130s. But my third guy, now this was the spot that was really tough, but I ended up going with David Pastrnak for a few reasons. Number one, 60 goal scorer. He scored 61 goals, one of two players to do that. And it's not very common to do that as well. There's only like 5 active players in the NHL that have scored 60 goals. And you're talking guys like Matthews, your guy Stamkos, Ovechkin, obviously. So it's a very exclusive club. But he was able to do that. He was also a plus 34. He was on a very good team. He had 13 game-winning goals and a total of 25 game-winning points. This guy's an animal. I mean, good move to extend them. They absolutely needed to do that. How about this, Garth? 407 shots. I mean, that's something you'd expect from an Ovechkin type season, and 50% shooting percentage to add to that is absolutely great. 91 hits as well, which is really high. 33 block shots. Fantastic season for him. Now, defensively, this was very tough, Garth. I kid you not. That second defenseman spot, there were about 6 or 7 guys that I think you legitimately could argue for that spot. But the first spot for me was very easy. Erik Karlsson. Again, I know he's a minus 26, but again, he's on a terrible team. I'm trying not to look too much in that. When you score 25 goals and you're, only the 6th defenseman ever to have over 100 points in a season, the first since Brian Leetch in 1994, 101 points, 76 assists, which was near the tops of all the NHL, and obviously comfortably on top. I mean, Guard, if he scored 0 goals, he would have had enough assists to tie for the defenseman league in the NHL for points. All the other guys had 76 points. He had 76 assists by himself. That's just absolutely unreal stat. He also had 90 block shots to add to it. Obviously, he's more of an offensive guy, not a lockdown defensive by any means, but great season for him. And the second one, now, there are so many guys I consider for this card. Morrissey, your guy Quinn Hughes. Thought about Hamilton. Brandon Montour had a great season as well. Heiskanen, Adam Fox. You could even say Cale Makar because his stats were only in 60 games. So if he played all the games, he'd probably be on there. But I ended up going with Darling for a few reasons. Number one, so he had 15 goals, 73 points, 58 assists. He was a plus 12. But he also added, this is the main reason I chose him, his defensive stats, Guard. He had 105 hits and 132 block shots, which relative to the guys around him that had similar offensive stats was pretty much by far the best marks. A guy like Sergachev had more hits and block shots, but he didn't quite have as many points for me, so I ended up giving Darling the edge on that one. I will say it was very close, though. I also like that he put the puck on the net, 204 shots. He also had 11 game-winning points, 9 game-winning assists, so directly contributing to his team winning. And obviously, critical centerpiece for a rebuilding Sabres team. Now, this last choice. Now, I got to do a lot of explaining on this one because I know this is out of the box, Garth, but hear me out. I know this will probably be the segment that gets clipped off to YouTube, so I might get some rage comments for this one. But I have reasoning for it. Now, let me explain. I understand Linus Ullmark statistically had the best season in the league. He had the best goals against average. And like Garth said, I agree with him. I believe he will win the Vezina. But there are some things I really like that Sorokin did this year that, in my opinion, just made him edge it out for me over Ullmark. And I will say, Garth, this was very close. I initially had Ullmark on my list. I thought about putting Sorokin. I then changed my mind again, put Ullmark back on. And then I put Sorokin again one more time, and I finally kept it there. So, first of all, right, I think the most obvious thing, the difference in quality of the teams. The Bruins, and I'm not saying the Islanders have a bad defense because they were still top 5, but the Bruins were comfortably the best defense in the league. Ullmark had a .938 save percentage, which is phenomenal. But then you look at his backup, Garth. Jeremy Swayman was 4th in the NHL in save percentage as well with a .920. So, there's not a major drop-off like you'd expect from Ullmark to Swayman. Now, Ullmark had a great season. Goals saved above average was phenomenal. But Ilya Sorokin was kind of right there with him. But something I think really works in Sorokin's favor as well, he played more games than Ullmark did. Ullmark was able to get a lot more rest because Swayman played 33 games the regular season. He was always fresh, ready to go, but on a great team as well. And he was a big part of the reason they were a great team. But I feel like Sorokin had to carry the load a bit more, right? If you ask who's a more valuable player to their team, respectively, Sorokin to the Islanders or Ullmark to the Bruins, I think it's Sorokin, Garth, because if you take Sorokin off the Islanders, in my opinion, they're a lottery team. If you take Allmark off the Bruins, I still think they're a good team. I mean, they made the playoffs last year with Swayman and, competitive first-round series. They've won Stanley Cups before with, these core, they still have Marchand, Krejci, and Bergeron. They've won a Stanley Cup with those guys before with Tim Thomas. They were competitive with Tuukka Rask. The Bruins are a team that are great at getting goaltender production. I think Allmark's done a remarkable job this year. But let's be honest, for the most part of his career, he's been a career backup. I think a lot of the reason he's had such a great season is the Bruins have been able to get the best out of him. Whereas I just think Sorokin is such a pure talent. Obviously, once again, stats-wise, he doesn't quite stack up with Allmark. His goals against average is higher. His save percentage is lower. But then you look at his saves, Garth. He had over 330 more saves than Allmark, which obviously you can factor in the extra games to that. But even, shots against per average game, I think it was something like 29 for the Bruins versus 31 for the Islanders. More high-scoring chances against Sorokin, I believe it was. It's a really tough call. Sorokin also led the league in shutouts with 6. Allmark only had 2. So to me, this was a very tough choice. I can totally understand if I get slammed for this or whatnot. It's a little bit out of the box. But I just think with how much Sorokin means to the Islanders, here's my final closing point, right, Garth? If you swap Sorokin and Allmark, if Sorokin was on the Bruins and Allmark was on the Islanders, do you not think that Sorokin could do the exact same thing that Allmark was doing this season for the Bruins? In my opinion, I believe he could. And on the other side, do you think Allmark would be as good as he was this season if he was on the Islanders team as compared to the Bruins? In my opinion, I don't think so. So I think it's a very close call. Once again, I acknowledge, I concede, Allmark has the better stats statistically, but I'm basing this around who I would want to start a franchise with, who I believe is more valuable to their team. And on that front, it's very close. Once again, I went back and forth with this one, but I ended up just barely giving it to Ilya Sorokin. Honorable mentions: Nathan McKinnon, Jason Robertson, Matthew Tkachuk, Josh Morrissey, Adam Fox, and obviously Linus Allmark. So that will do it for my team of the year. Any thoughts on my list, Garth?
Not really. I will say I'm glad to see Dahlin on there because he was very, very high up in me kind of narrowing it down between the defensemen. Like you said, just absolutely insane on the defensive side of things with the block shots and total hits. Also, I get where you're coming from with Ilya Sorokin. I agree with a lot of what you said. Very, very key factor to a team that wasn't bad, but definitely having him made them probably better than they actually are if you do take him off that roster. And then lastly, just 2 guys now who didn't make my honorable mentions list that I want to give a huge shout out to just super quickly. Uzi Saros of the Nashville Predators, absolutely abysmal team, but that dude just carried the load all season. Most time on ice, most games played, I believe most shot attempts faced as well, and he still managed to have himself a pretty solid year. And also Connor Hellebuck, very much in the similar situation, but the Jets are actually a playoff team, whereas the Predators weren't, but still, tied for most games played, up there for total shots on goals faced, really good year, 2.49 goals against, 920 save percentage, 37 wins on the year. So, it's very hard to leave some of these guys off the list, but those 2 guys specifically, I wanted to show some love and appreciation for, because quite frankly, neither one of them really get too much of it in the national media sense.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely phenomenal players. Like I said, this list was, some of the team of the weeks have been difficult, but doing an actual team of the year, trying to pick between all these players. There were so many. Tage Thompson wasn't on either of our honorable mentions, and he was phenomenal as well. There's just so many good. Jack Hughes, you could go on and on. Mikko Rantanen. I'm just thinking of guys right off the top of my head that were remarkable, but did not quite make the cut. It's a very exclusive club to be on the team of the year. But Tom says, love the Dahlin pick. Feel like I barely saw him on post All-Star break, but glad he's here. Yeah, he really wasn't on it past the past All-Star break. In fact, I don't know if he was on it at all. But anyways, moving on to our last couple of banners here. We're going to do our cumulative team of the year. This one's a little more simple. This has absolutely no personal input from me and Garth, other than the fact it is an accumulation of the players that have appeared the most on our team of the weeks throughout the season. So I'll go ahead and put this up here. This is the cumulative team of the year. And we see the player that appeared the most. What a surprise. Connor McDavid with 10 appearances. And I will say this, Garth, it could have been even more because it felt like there were 15 weeks where it felt like he was on our honorable mentions as well. But there was one or two guys that just had an absolute career week that was just barely better than McDavid's kind of average week. So he could have been on it even more, but he was still the player with the most appearances. Then it's McKinnon with 8, and Erik Karlsson had 8 appearances as well, which was the most for a defenseman. Then Draisaitl with 6, and for the second defensive guy, it was a tie between Roman Josi and Cale Makar, both with 6 appearances each. Once again, I maintain that if Makar hadn't missed time to injury, he probably would have been on my team of the year, maybe both of our teams of the year. And then goalie, don't get me wrong, Garth, fantastic goalie, but probably a little bit of bias here from the fact that Vasilevskiy had 8 appearances and the other goalies weren't even close. But I will say he did have some dominant weeks in here and there. It was a little bit of a down year for him, but his down year, once again, like I said earlier with Igor, was still better than most guys' career years. So definitely not out of left field. But it was interesting how guys like Ullmark and Sorokin really weren't on many of our teams of the week. Probably because, once again, with the McDavid thing, they were just consistently excellent, whereas on those weeks there was one guy that had a career week and you never hear from him again that was just barely edging it out. And then honorable mentions, Rasmus Dahlin and Charlie McAvoy both had 5 appearances. There were 10 players with 4 appearances and 8 with 3. And there's one last slide that I want to show that kind of delves in this a bit more. Just kind of, general statistics that are kind of interesting, but also general thoughts on how our Team of the Week experiment went for the first year. We'll see if we can, decide to change anything moving on to next year. But the players that were nominated 4 times, there were, I believe, 10 of them. Kucherov, Panarin, Fiala, Point, Thompson, Robertson, Claude Giroux, as the ESPN guys love to call him, Keller, Rantanen, and Montour were all nominated 4 times. There were also 8 additional players that were nominated 3 times. There's Pasternak, which definitely seems low for him with the season he had and the fact he's on both our Team of the Years. Mitch Marner, Zibanejad, Hagel, Keandre Miller, Heiskanen, Ottinger, and Saros. And some fun stats, 108 different players appeared on the Team of the Weeks this season, which is the equivalent of almost 5 full NHL teams. 33 players made a list twice, 48 made one once. Many players were also honorable mentions, but were never fully on a list. Teams with the most different players to appear on a Team of the Week. 8 for the Tampa Bay Lightning, which once again might be a little bit biased from Garth there. 7 for Colorado. And then, you can see the teams here. I'm not going to list them all off because there's a ton, but most of the teams have 5 or 4 players. Interesting note here towards the bottom, Garth. Only 2 players with 0 players to make an appearance. The Chicago Blackhawks, which makes sense, but then the Vegas Golden Knights. Was really surprised when I saw that, actually. I thought Logan Thompson or someone else, Jack Eichel maybe, might have made an appearance here or there. They must have just been honorable mentions, but definitely a surprising name there. Only 1 appearance for the Islanders, which I remember was Sorokin. Arizona had it 5 times, which seems high, but it was like, I remember that week. It was a week where Keller and Schmaltz had like an insane week together, and they were both on the list and stuff like that pretty much. And then some final notes for how this Team of the Week stuff is going. I want your thoughts after we finish, Garth. In my opinion, the Team of the Weeks, I kind of mentioned this earlier, they account for dominance over a week more than consistency over a season, which, makes sense. But, I think that's why there's some superstars that haven't been nominated as many times as you might think. Surprising how some superstar players made so few appearances. I made some examples. Pasternak, Ullmark, and Sorokin are the main ones that stuck out to me. Dominant line mates often appear on the same list, so if 2 guys play on the same line and have 10 points in a week, they're probably both going to be on the list. Different methods of assessment, pure total numbers versus best averages. Now, this is one we talked about a few times throughout the week's, Garth. This mainly applied to goaltenders from what I saw, but it could also be, do you pick a guy that had 7 points in 3 games or a guy that had 8 and 4, that kind of thing. And I think it's more akin to goaltenders, where I would often choose a guy that only played 2 games but had like a 970 save percentage, whereas you'd pick a guy that played 3 and had like a 930. Stuff like that seemed to be something that we had a different philosophy on. Most of the teams that had the most players appear make sense, but like I said, Vegas and no appearances was surprising. Just because a player doesn't appear on the list doesn't mean the host hate the player or your team. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we even like a player if they appear on the list. We're very non-biased, or at least we try to be non-biased on these lists. But obviously, a bias here or there can appear. But we explain our reasoning for a reason, so you guys can understand where we're coming from. So even if you don't agree, you can at least see our logic for when we picked who we did pick. Let's take all factors into account, but obviously it leans more towards offensive production. So, like it says there, pure defensive defensemen are grinders, probably not going to make the list. 4 players on the cumulative list made at least 1 appearances on our normal team of the year list: McDavid, Carlson, Draisaitl, I believe it was, and McKinnon. But only 2 of them were appearing on all 3 of the lists, which was McDavid and Carlson, which kind of not a surprise at all, considering how dominant offensively those guys were compared to the rest of their positions. And once again, like I mentioned earlier, the averages for superstar plays is often a career week for another player. This is why guys like McDavid were honorable mentions multiple times, but just barely missed out. And then the last note, last but not least, Garth is a homer. A lot of Tampa Bay Lightning players on these lists, but you know what? I respect it. You can do pretty much anything you want for these lists. I tend to go more unbiased. I barely picked Pittsburgh players, but if you want to be, you can do whatever with your list. So, any kind of concluding thoughts on our team of the week, the first year, Garth? Maybe something we want to try different next year to make it better, or just any general thoughts?
Yeah, I think like you said there, Noah, a lot of times for team of the week, it seems like there's a guy who just has like an absolutely insane week. He might not have a good overall season, but he just breaks out that one week, and that's why he makes the list. Obviously, I'll say I have bias towards Tampa Bay Lightning players. But to kind of balance it out, I don't really have biases against anybody. Like there was never a point in this season where I said, I'm not picking that guy because I don't like the team he plays for, or I don't like, like him personally as a player. So that's really cool. I don't think that it, like I said, I didn't not pick anybody this year because I didn't like them or the team that they played for. So like you said, no, if you guys don't see a lot of your favorite player, a lot of your favorite team on the list, just know that it's not because we're out here going, we don't really like your team, we're not going to put them on the list. We really do try to pick the best possible positions or players rather for that week. And I will say, I think we leaned very heavily towards offensive production, which doesn't surprise me because kind of all sports are leaning in that direction right now, where offense is kind of the end all be all for the most part. But next season, I will definitely be trying to give a little bit more love to the guys that just have like insane defensive weeks, or, maybe their stats don't show it on paper, but as a player in general, just what they were doing for the team effort was really, really good. And, other than that, just a really, really fun time this year. A lot of weeks it was very difficult. I don't think there were weeks where like one player might have been really easy, but there never was a week where the entire list as a whole was very easy to pick. Definitely had to sit down and put a lot of thought and effort into it all season long, and just really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed, the viewers' feedback, comments on posts, stuff like that. I think it's a really cool way to get everybody to interact with the show and the social media platform as well.